This is the podcast VO to Go, recorded at the famous Radio Ranch in Sherman Oaks, California. I'm your host, Laurel Vanderland, and today is September 27th, 2023. We are talking with our guest director, video game guest director, Jeremy Hall. Jeremy, welcome to VO to Go and to the ranch.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, good to have you back at the ranch. So I thought we would dive in right away. We have basically 15 or so minutes. Obviously, the big thing that has happened in the industry is the writer's strike ended at 12:01 this morning, which is good news. Obviously, the membership has to vote on it, but I'm not anticipating any trouble there. It seems the big question for both the writers and the actors, which still needs to be negotiated, is AI, the infamous artificial intelligence. What's your take on that at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, basically coming at it from video game world, it is there. I know the LA Times did a story not too long ago with some folks, Eric Pasoja, I think is the actor, who did a Call of Duty game a long time ago, and then found his face and likeness and voice, I believe, on another character in a much later game. So it is there. It is happening. I think it is minimal at the moment, which is good, but obviously the technology is there, and as it's becoming more affordable, it's going to be something that companies are definitely going to look to do. So it's great that we're getting ahead of it a little bit. I say ahead of it cautiously because it is really here. But in the video game world, with the new contract they're negotiating right now, to try to get that AI language in there, so we have what they're calling, which I think is a great term, informed consent. In other words, knowing it's going to be used for that, and finding a way to negotiate, get it on paper, so an actor can't be abused or taken advantage of, really, which is there.
In the circumstance that you just mentioned, I take it that this particular actor did not receive informed consent, did not give informed consent in order for them.
That's correct. Yeah. And again, that's what I've read. I don't know him. I don't know the source specifically, but the LA Times article, he says that no, he did not at all. It was just used again. Now, he does state as well, and it is stated that there's nothing in the contract language that prohibits that. So it's not that the Call of Duty people or whoever went against the contract. There's just nothing there that talks about that. So there's it can be abused, it can be exploited. Your voice, your likeness can be put into this machine, and then they can create entire characters and entire language, scenes, games with what they have of you already.
Yeah.
And that's certainly, again, I think it's not been cost effective until recently, but I think it's starting to become cost effective. And if that's the case, then obviously companies are going to want to do that.
Very
I've heard
much
other
so.
stories of background, basically sort of similar to background work, but in video games. This is the small characters on the street, the NPCs. They're talking about using AI for that. Now, I don't know of any specific cases yet, but I know that was a discussion I'd heard, people going, yeah, it would be great if we could just pay the actors once, right? And then just use their likeness and voice and performance. With AI, we can make it whatever we want and use it in all these different games. We only have to pay once, which is obviously not what we want. And we don't want the actor to be taken advantage of. What I think is important is we're not talking about canceling or stopping the technology. The technology's there.
Yeah.
And it's out. And it's going to be used. So it's not like that's going to be changing. And I don't think anybody's saying we shouldn't change it or shouldn't use it. When new technology comes up, that's where this stuff happens. Contract negotiations, strikes, things like that. And this is just another case of something that's there. And again, like I said, I don't think it's an everyday occurrence. I think it's still pretty minimal, but I think it's something that we're getting ahead of, which is a really great idea as a union.
I hope we're ahead of it. I sincerely hope we're ahead of it, because if we are, I agree with you. I think we're just ahead of it, because this is something that could very easily turn into an abusive situation. I heard something on the news recently, just a couple days ago on the national news, which is dealing with translation. And for example, if I recorded something in English, there is a machine, if you will, that can take my voice, clone it, and immediately translate all of it using my voice into German, into French, into Japanese. That's scary. That's really scary.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of practical things, right? That makes sense. It's like, if we have this technology, we can use it for all these great things. but it belies ownership, right? So, you're basically saying, well, why can't we do that? Wouldn't it be great to be able to do all these different languages? It's like, yes, but your voice, especially if you're a performer, that's your livelihood. That's your stamp on things. That's you've worked and trained for your whole life to use correctly and, whatever. And to have that taken and then used in all these different cases without any informed consent is, what we're trying to get away from. Not that technology is necessarily all bad or evil, or that it's not going to be here, because it is going to be here. It is already here. But that we need to just get a little bit of control onto it so that the language in the contracts has stuff that says, basically informed consent, that if it is used this way, you're aware of it, you've negotiated for it, all that kind of stuff.
Sure, yeah. Well, we got to take the reins on this horse is what it boils down to.
Yeah, I think so. And it sounds like, all the contracts, and I'm speaking of the AMPTP plus the interactive contract that they're negotiating now. Oh boy, I'm sure there are other ones too. They're getting that language in there now. It's a talking point, obviously, that's in the news a lot. So that's great, and that's great that we're all doing that, right? That every contract is putting that in now to get kind of uniform on it, which I think is great.
Yeah, as it pertains to video game, which is your bailiwick, the situation has been, I think, more than rumored that SAG was considering striking in that particular discipline as well as the others. Obviously, there hasn't been much action with the SAG-AFTRA situation because the writer situation had to be resolved first.
Right.
That's only logical, Mr. Spock. But have you heard anything in particular as it pertains to video game and the potential of that being included in the actor strike?
Yeah, I think that, I don't know specifics, I'm not part of the negotiating committee in any way. I have been in the committee previously when I was a developer, actually, in Insomniac Games, but when, this one I'm not involved in, but I do know as an actor that, they have put up a vote of allowing a strike to happen, a strike vote, the terminology for that. But anyway, that has been agreed and passed. So there is a strike, that's it, authorization. There's a strike authorization that has gone through for the interactive agreement, which is what they're negotiating, I believe, this week or next week they go back to the table. And they have been negotiating since November of last year, as I understand it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's been a long time. I've gone to meetings and things like that. Again, I'm not on the committee, but from what I've gathered, people are pretty far apart in terms of the developers, producers that are negotiating on part of that, and then the actors, SAG-AFTRA actors that are negotiating on part of SAG-AFTRA. So strike authorization has been approved, which means it doesn't mean it's going to happen. It just means that if they decide to call it, the members have voted that it's okay to do so.
Okay to do so, yeah. Well,
yeah.
Interactive is a big market. Yeah. It has to be dealt with because it's just far too easy to apply this technology as it currently exists, and it will continue to develop and become even more pervasive, I have no doubt.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And you can see it in all different forms of uses for on camera, and of course voiceover, and of course video games. So it's something to get ahead of, and when I say ahead of, again, I cautiously say that because I know it is here. It's just something you're not seeing as every day yet. But yeah, it's important. It's obviously the negotiating committee has put that on their one of the tops of their lists, so that's there. And hopefully they'll be able to reach an agreement with the companies. In the next week or so.
And hopefully they'll be able to do it within the parameters of 5 months, which is what happened with the writers. But again, the actors can't do too much until there is a script, so it was rather necessary to get that taken care of first, because without the words on the paper, nothing's going to happen.
Exactly.
So we have that. But on a cheerier note, segueing into the video game industry as it currently exists, wanted to ask you some questions about that, because obviously that's a part of the industry that has become... Well, it's become pervasive, if you will. I mean, you can't move without bumping into a video game, it seems. Which is good news for the actors, because that puts a lot of actors to work. So what is your take on the video game industry at this point in time? Where do you see it headed? Not discussing the AI situation. I think we've covered that pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, the elephant in the room is the fact that negotiations are going around for SAG-AFTRA with the contract. So, a strike authorization has been allowed. So it's tentative, right now for that. We're all, hopeful, but standing strong. and just hoping things can work out correctly and fairly for everybody. So apart from that contract negotiation, everything in terms of the overall industry, it's very strong. I mean, there are a lot of very big companies making video games that have huge budgets and cast tons of actors. There are a lot of smaller independent game companies that are doing a lot. There's a lot of union games going out there, but there are a ton and more so of non-union games.
Oh, really?
So for the actor, whether a new actor or established, there's a lot of opportunity, which is great. And as I mentioned in my workshops, in terms of types of VO acting, video games and commercials, I think, are the easiest to kind of step into as a new actor. Animation, I think, is a bit more used to established people, and they can get a lot of established actors. They can get a lot of film and TV actors to do animation. So they kind of it's harder to break into, in my opinion. I think video games and commercials, we're always looking in video games for new voices, right? New people. There's a lot of different tiers of roles. There's a lot of, Soldier Number 5, as well as like small supporting to lead stuff. And, it's all available. So it's great to, get in the door as Soldier Number 5 and then kind of work your way up by working hard, working well, and being there and doing a good job. So
let
so
me
it's great,
ask you
in that way.
if,
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
if I may, and that is because I remember at one point in time with the video game contract, the producers were allowed to get quite a few voices out of one actor. I'm wondering what that figure is at this point in time.
Yeah, it depends. So the main contract is 3. It's 3 voices per session, right? There is something called an atmospheric contract, which is comes into play after the game has gone through has cast several actors and has been in production for quite a while, done a lot of work with a main cast. In the standard contract, it opens up this atmospheric category, which, if the lines are very limited, allows up to 10, I believe, voices.
Ooh, wow.
Basically, what this covers is if they have people on the street in New York and they want coverage of New York. So they just want guys going taxi and like pizza or whatever it is. They want guys to be able to like actors to come in to do more than just 3 roles because they've got so many people to do, and they want the actor to be able to do more with these very limited 1 or 2 line roles. And that's what the atmospheric provision of the contract is for.
So really, that's a corollary to ADR.
Yeah, different. ADR will be it depends. In the video game contract, it can be atmospheric, so that would be up to 10 voices. Again, ADR, you can do up to 10 if you've met certain parameters in the contract for the game with the contract. But that would also work for looping for video games. Now, there's a separate looping thing, obviously, for BTP.
Well, what we affectionately call Walla.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but it's a great thing. I when I was working at Insomniac, it was a very new thing. I helped kind of spearhead a lot of it, of bringing actors in to loop to have these streets and these outside scenes come to life, and it's really fun.
Yeah, it is.
And it really brings out the life of the video game. Again, this was technology we couldn't do years ago because they couldn't put that many voices and faces and things into a game without it going over in memory. They could really only do certain characters, and as the game's gotten bigger, as the consoles have gotten bigger, you're now allowed to do these big sort of crowd scenes and street scenes and bring in actors to do Walla.
Yeah, no, and you definitely need that because otherwise it's just very empty in that scene.
Yeah, oh yeah. And
not everything happens at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and even then, if you've got a scene in New York, there's a lot of stuff that's going on at that hour.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can only queue up the line of somebody going like, "Hey, you!" Like I don't know how many times before it starts to get a little repetitive. So
just
you
a
need to have,
tad, yeah.
Lots of assets, all that stuff,
Well,
which has always been limiting too.
You mentioned that you think that the video game is an easier avenue for an actor to get involved in voiceover. How do you recommend that an actor do that? Are you working largely through agents when you're looking for talent?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, generally especially the bigger games, they call AAA games, the bigger studios, they'll work pretty much solely with agents. It's generally union, but not always, but solely with agents. So, my first thing would be like, hey, really establish a relationship with an agent. Try to get representation, obviously. If you're new and you don't have any credits, and the agent wants to, wait until they hear more about you, get that relationship going. Ask them questions. Don't stalk them, but find ways to get a reel together, send them the reel, get feedback, do casting workshops, try to network as much as you can people in the voiceover video game industry. But yeah, an agent is a necessary thing for a lot of the bigger games. Smaller games may go through casting services or may go through casting directors that you may know, and just you send them your reel, you develop a relationship, and maybe they call you in or send you some sides for an audition. Some pay to play places like Voices.com and I think Voices123 do have small budget, very small budget video games as well. So that avenue is there, but it is smaller.
Yeah, I would think, and that's a whole different subject altogether, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so there are pluses and minuses to that for sure.
Yeah, no, we could spend quite a bit of time talking about those particular services. But here's what I would, because we could go on for quite some time here. There's no choice about that. This is a very deep well. But let me ask you this, just from your personal experience of being a video game casting director. How did you end up getting into directing?
Yeah, well, I'm an actor, and I started out as an actor, and I worked in video games as a day job, as a tester for games, and it developed from there. Basically, it was a great day job. I don't know if it still is, but it was a great day job for an actor at the time because you could leave and do auditions and come back and test the game as a QA guy. And I got to know the audio guys. This was back when Electronic Arts Los Angeles was DreamWorks Interactive, way back in the day. And they said, hey, we need a dialogue guy. Would you be interested in joining the company in the audio department? So I said, sure, I did that. And then as I was the dialogue guy, they're like, hey, you should learn about integrating dialogue first, but then also learn about, we want to get more actors. How do you send stuff out to agents? I learned that a little bit. Then I learned to get into the booth, to watch people that were directing and learn that. And because of my experience as an actor, and I have an MFA and trained a long time, did a lot of stage work, they were like, you should talk to the actors, actors. So I became sort of the actor translator with back in the day. Back in the day, there weren't voice directors for video games.
Right, yeah.
Or the writer. And they're great people, but they don't know how to direct actors.
No.
So I'd help with that. And then that moved into directing myself for several companies, and then going freelance a number of years ago.
What's your favorite part of directing?
The playfulness of working with an actor in a booth, when you've got a time limit, obviously, and you've got a script you've got to get done, but when you get in there and you can really dig deep, have fun, you've got someone that gets it, that understands the role, you're communicating well, you're able to try different things. It's so fun to say, like, hey, let's try, we did the A and the B take, that was great. I think, A is probably the solid take. Let's try this. What happens if what happens if you hadn't slept for like 17 hours and you haven't eaten, and now you're saying this line, you're on guard duty, but your feet are hurting, your shoes are too small, you haven't slept in like 18 hours. Okay, now say that line. How does that sound? And just seeing what happens, and sometimes it's even better. Like, that's perfect. Or sometimes you go back with the A take, it doesn't matter, but you're playing around, you're getting into this world in a very specific way, which is really fun.
Yeah, the creativity aspect of it, and just to kind of go out on a limb and see what happens, and sometimes you actually get original sin, as it were. So, well, great. Obviously, we're going to segue now into class.